So I say this a lot. The worst thing to happen to medicine is money. And then the second worst thing is politics. And as medical professionals, we act in good faith. And when a drug is prescription only, it's because it needs to be used appropriately or else it could cause harm.
Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. Hi, and welcome to Influence to Death. I am your co-host, Victoria Lafont.
I'm your other co-host, Hannah Wright, and today we have a awesome guest on the podcast for a very cool topic that I am excited to learn about. Bob Block, or is that how you introduce?
I don't know why. I see Robert. That's why, because on the screen. But yeah, you prefer Bob. So Bob, welcome to the podcast. So Bob, I know you're a pharmacist, but I think there's like different, not types of pharmacists,
Sure.
but like, would you just tell us about yourself?
There are different types of pharmacists.
Give us your background.
So I am a clinical pharmacist. I work in the acute care setting in a hospital. Okay. I work at Deaconess Health. I've been there for about 2.25 years right now. So what I do is I work with these hospitalized patients. I make sure that we're using medication safely and effectively. And I provide input to the care team and as far as what medications we should be starting, what we should be stopping, when we should change doses, all that kind of thing. So I'm kind of right in there in the guts.
Okay, so and that's like, I'm saying that's a little different than maybe like my pharmacist at CVS.
That's an incredibly important role. Like what you do is just thinking about that for me gives me anxiety because I would be like, oh, I'm definitely going to screw something up, so knowing that there are people like you who have like studied and are an expert in medications
Well, I appreciate that.
is very reassuring.
There's about 4 or 5 people that look at a medication order before it actually reaches the patient. So that because there's the provider prescribing the medication, there's us looking at the medication, making sure that or looking at the order, make sure that it's appropriate, and then we have our pharmacy technicians looking at the actual product leaving the pharmacy. And then we have the nurses reviewing the medication at administration time, making sure that they're actually giving what's supposed to be given. And they're also using kind of their experience of how do patients typically react to this? When do they last get a dose? That kind of thing.
Yeah. I can't help but think, there is this, it's like a talking point in, I think, more extreme, like integrative circles. It's like really brought up, there's like people are harmed by medication or they die by I don't know exactly how it is accurately, but that it's like death in the medical system, and I think they say it's like the third leading cause of death or something. Like, is it called iatrogenic medical
Right,
death?
where it's kind of like unintentional effects of the medications of what we're doing intervention wise, where of course we're not intending to cause harm to the patient, but there are side effects to every medication. And whenever we're handling these patients, whenever we're caring for these patients, there is a degree of risk in what we're doing. We always try to minimize that risk, but we always have to do that kind of risk versus benefit calculation.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as you're talking, like, I didn't know I didn't think about there being 5 different people. It's like there are so many safeguards put in place, but then like this one point is just focused on. And then, so Bob, a lot in this podcast, it comes up where there's always risk and reward. And it's like hard to remember that in moments.
We call it the Swiss cheese model. Imagine you have a bunch of slices of Swiss cheese all lined up and there's holes in each one, but if you have a whole bunch lined up, the holes probably don't match up for an error to get through.
That's great. I've like heard that. I some distant part of my perimenopause adult brain that's familiar. So today we are going to focus on ivermectin, and we asked Bob to come because he knows way more than we do, but people have probably noticed, and actually our listeners have written in or messaged us to ask us to cover this topic because ivermectin we're going to talk about the history, which Hannah, God, I have such a big question about the history based on what I found in PubMed. But we're going to talk about the history and then our bias. And Bob is welcome to talk about his bias if he wants, but we're not going to force him to do that because it's extremely vulnerable. So if you want to, you can. But because ivermectin has gone from this, it's an anti-parasitic drug, I believe. I mean, those guys won a Nobel Prize for it not too long ago. And then, of course, I think most people are familiar with it became popular during COVID as people, possible intervention. And then some people really took it to heart that it was helping COVID. I'm super curious to hear what you have to say about that, Bob. And now people are talking about it as a cancer cure, is what I've seen on TikTok and Instagram. And there's actually the New York Times just covered this in July of this year. There's an article we'll link to in the show notes. And even in, like the introduction of some of the research studies that I looked at, the actual research teams are addressing medical misinformation around like kind of the hyperbole with how people are talking about it with cancer. So we're going to do our best to cover all of that in the next 50 minutes. So I'll shut up and Hannah, do you want to talk about
Yeah,
the
I'll give a
history?
brief history, and
Yeah,
then
of
Bob, I
course.
would love for you if
Just
you
yeah.
chime in and you're like, "Nope, wrong, that's not right," please let me know. But I have to say that before I say the history, and I'll talk maybe more about my bias, I didn't know any of the stuff that I found on ivermectin. I had a completely different idea solely based on what I heard during the COVID pandemic and the misinformation there, and that led me to, like, develop this very skeptical view of ivermectin. Now reading about the history, my mind is like, this is so cool. Ivermectin is so fascinating and beneficial. Vic, you had pulled up this study from 1946, but
Yeah, it's
I don't
and
know.
I know it's now that I've looked a little closer. Well, okay, and Bob maybe knows something about this, but it
Right.
just
Different.
happened to be the first date, PubMed filters. They have that. That's like actually we taught a webinar yesterday teaching people how to put research into their marketing and I was like, this is my favorite, like part of PubMed. But when I slid the timeline all the way back, there was this study and the
Right.
full text was on Sci-Hubs, but they didn't discover it at that
At
time.
that time, right. It's about a different, I guess, medication from a different type of bacteria from diphtheria. That one was from 1946. So
Ivermectin.
maybe that predated some of the scientific, like, hypotheses or something. Yeah, but so in the '70s, ivermectin is like that's the discovery by 2 main scientists, a microbiologist, a Japanese microbiologist, Satoshi Umura, and an Irish parasitologist, William C. Campbell. And then they would go on to win the Nobel Prize for their discovery. So basically what ivermectin is, it's a macrolide lactone compound that they isolated from a type of bacteria in the soil, and that bacteria, I'm gonna try to pronounce it, it's called Streptomyces avermitilis.
You
You have
got
you
it.
been practicing? I think you
No,
practiced.
I'm just good at reading.
My like fifth grade. Oh my God, I'm up next for reading. Anxiety self just came up. That was
Oh, that
awesome.
was my
You nailed
favorite
it.
part of 5th grade. You know what I mean? I love being the
Boys were my
casualty.
favorite part of fifth grade. Obviously, because that shit didn't turn out. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so ivermectin, it was first used in animals, that's, like, I feel like not uncommon. And then eventually there was enough science to support its use in humans, and it's a very effective anti-parasitic. So it kills parasites, helminths, and all kinds of other stuff too. And so by the 80s was when scientists realized it could actually work for a human parasite called, this one I'm going to not do well with,
I have faith in you.
Onocherica volvulus.
Pretty much.
Bob, do you know? Put Bob on the spot.
Yeah. So listeners, you might know what this recognize it because it causes river blindness. So it's the parasite that causes river blindness that is endemic to like certain areas. And it's, I think, the second leading cause of blindness in the world. I might be off with that stat, but it's really serious. And so, according to the World Health Organization, river blindness mostly affects people in rural areas in sub Saharan Africa and Yemen, and then sometimes parts of Latin America. So, its use for that is pretty amazing because it's effective and it helps people not become blind. So just think about the impact that has on people's lives and well-being. It's pretty incredible. And so obviously, like I mentioned, it did go through bunch of clinical trials before it was deemed safe for humans. That's how that works. So it's not just like this random drug we're using for humans. It's been through it. It's been in use since the 70s. And so that's something I wanted to point out, like on this topic, with it being talked about in the influencer space, is that like I think there's another side where maybe people like me had a misconception that it's like a veterinary drug and people are just using it willy-nilly, but obviously it does have like a long history. Now pre COVID-19, which is I feel like when a lot of people started hearing about it, there was an article written in 2011 and it was titled Ivermectin Wonder Drug from Japan, and we have it linked in the show notes. It's a really cool article to read, but the authors suggest that ivermectin is in rank with penicillin and aspirin as the most important drugs in history because it's so effective and it's cheap and it works and it's super safe even for children. Bob might
I
want to
saw
correct me
that.
on that, but that's what I've read, is that there's some contraindications, but like generally like it works well. And the reason it's special is because it was the world's first and tectocide, which means it treats both internal parasites and external. So you can take it or put it on the skin, which Victoria you'll talk about.
I
And
love
then the
ivermectin.
last cool fact I want to throw in the history is that like you said, now it's being investigated for other uses, especially in cancer, but it's a strong anti-inflammatory agent. And I wonder if that's where some of the ideas came about using it for the COVID virus, like people reading these old studies. I haven't found the origin of like why did it start getting recommended for COVID-19? Like that, I don't know. I'm very curious
Uh,
about that. And Bob, maybe
yeah.
you know the answer to that. Blocks this pathway called the nuclear kappa beta pathway in the body. And that kind of like starts this chain reaction of inflammation, which sometimes I guess is beneficial, but not if you have too much of it. Yeah,
Sure.
do you want to add anything
So
to that, Bob, that I
ivermectin at its
missed?
appropriate doses it's incredibly safe. At its appropriate doses. At its
Yeah. Okay, maybe you
appropriate
should say that one more
doses
time.
for its appropriate medical indications, it is very safe. If you take too much of it, there'll be issues, which is applies to everything. Water is great for you, but if you have too much, you drown, right? So ivermectin, if you have an appropriate dose, then you're just fine
Yeah.
with it. The way that ivermectin works in terms of parasites is it's technically a neurotoxin. It inhibits the GABA signaling pathway, and it causes nerve damage, nerve dysfunction, and that essentially paralyzes the parasites, and that interrupts their movement, and then also interrupts their not just like their like movement muscles, but their internal muscles as well, like for their digestive tract. So a lot of these parasites actually starve to death because they can't move the nutrients through their digestive system. So it
Is it
is.
with the something to do with like the chloride channels?
Yeah. So
And
the ivermectin,
yeah,
it affects the chloride
Oh,
channels of the nerve cells. It affects all the cells, but the nerve cells have much more, their chloride channels there are more susceptible to the ligand gate. Ligand gated channel is a channel that is opened by another molecule binding to the channel. So in this case, it's the ivermectin is the ligand. It binds to the chloride channel and essentially makes it stay open. Cells are polarized. There's a lot of machinery in the cell and the cell walls and the cell membranes to keep certain ions inside and outside of the cell. That's especially important in nerve
mhm.
cells and the signaling cells because that's how they transmit messages from one another. So by keeping those chloride channels open, the cell will hyperpolarize and then it cannot effectively send any signals back and forth to other cells. And that's where the muscle paralysis comes from. That's where the neurotoxicity comes from in these parasites.
I'm
that's
smiling with glee because I'm imagining that happened to the Demodex mites that like to live on my face because of that rosacea. I'm like, I just want to kill those little bastards. So every time I use it, I'll be like imagining
Exactly,
them just like
exactly.
being
And
paralyzed.
drug is so safe is that in mammals, humans and other mammals, we have a blood-brain barrier where our nerve cells, our central nervous system is sequestered from our general circulation. Basically, there's an extra layer in there. There's a bouncer at the door that says this molecule can come in, this molecule cannot. And ivermectin is not allowed into the central nervous system.
So invertebrates do not have the blood-brain barrier. Vertebrates
Right.
do have the, it's something to say, like, Bob, people who listen, they have probably heard that term blood-brain barrier. Like, it's a little bit of a darling in functional medicine where people talk about, like, if you have leaky gut, you have leaky blood-brain barrier. I have no idea how that translates into your world, but like people will know that
Mhm.
term.
Mhm. Right. So the blood-brain barrier, it's this very effective kind of safety measure. Nerve cells are a lot more delicate than a lot of the other cell types in the body. So having that blood-brain barrier helps to protect them from stuff.
Yeah, that's legit. I mean, like what you're saying from, yeah, certain like drugs maybe are not accessible. Maybe some drugs are. That would.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of drugs that do cross the blood-brain barrier, and that's one of the things that we think about whenever we're designing and then prescribing medications. So a lot of times, if drugs to like cause like drowsiness, like Benadryl, that crosses the blood-brain barrier.
Mhm.
So then you have that kind of effect. Opioids cross the blood-brain barrier, and that's how they inhibit the pain signaling in the nerve cells.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I just had an idea for another topic. Would you
I've
come
had
back
like
on and talk about Benadryl with all the new science on the dangers?
Hmm.
Sorry, I'm just putting that away in my brain for later.
The
Bob,
good old
we are
hat
gonna
man.
adopt you, is what Hannah is saying. Like, yeah, as he's been talking, I'm like, I want him to come on and talk about this, this,
Yeah,
this.
sure.
So ivermectin, you said at certain doses, it's very safe, but at not safe doses, does it cross the blood-brain barrier?
Yes. So a lot of in ivermectin specifically, it is removed from cells through the P glycoprotein enzyme. And that is an efflux pump, essentially. It removes molecules from cells. And if there's too much ivermectin, it just can't keep up,
Mm.
basically.
So
And
it
that's how it can kind of penetrate into the blood-brain barrier and get into the nerve cells.
is that something that has happened, has been documented to happen in people taking it off label that you're aware of?
Yeah. So whenever people take too much, this is kind of where like the horse dewormer stuff kind of happens. So in humans, a typical dose is it'll be around like you know 200 milligrams to 400 milligrams, somewhere in there. It depends on the exact indication. Whenever you're using it orally, horse dose is in the grams. It's an order of magnitude
Whoa.
higher. So that's how we end up with that toxicity.
And what
Yeah.
happens? Does it mess with our nerves? So that's, I feel
It
so professional.
absolutely
Mess with.
does.
Okay.
So whenever someone is exposed to too much ivermectin, then they can develop ataxias and muscle movements where either they, kind of have a shake or they have a little bit of paralysis, typically in like the extremities.
Mm-hmm.
You have these kind of nervous system effects whenever someone has too much ivermectin on board.
Okay.
And this can also lead to things like blindness and respiratory issues.
Oh my
So,
God, it's like the opposite of what it
Yeah.
was, like killing the parasite that caused the river blindness, and
So will
then
that resolve once you discontinue the medication, or is that permanent?
sometimes
Whoa.
it depends, which is not a very satisfying answer, but some people have resolution. Usually, like the muscle movements, stuff like that, it'll at least improve. Sometimes it's permanent, sometimes it's not. If someone develops like the blindness, then a lot of times that does not resolve, or definitely not completely.
but I wonder if there are any documented cases
That's what
of
I'm wondering.
people.
What's the prevalence of that happening?
Right.
Because so for me, like I mentioned, my knowledge of ivermectin was like, that's a horse drug. Like
Right.
I
Mhm.
spoke to people, I'm in the South. And
That's the most Chattanooga shit I have ever heard.
who were
That's
like,
a horse trade.
they tell me one of their family members went down to the feed store to get ivermectin
Mhm.
to take during the pandemic, and I was like, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." I had no idea of that different in dose and what would happen. I just that's that's pretty wild. So I do wonder, like, if that is some people have leftover side effects from taking too high doses, and they didn't realize.
Right. And some people do. It's hard to make a study or a case report on that because typically these people are taking other things as well.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then you can't really say like this is exactly because of this drug they're taking and this is exactly because of this supplement. Because
Mhm.
when you have that cocktail, you say, well, these symptoms are consistent with this part of the cocktail, but it's hard to responsibly say this directly led to that.
We love you, Bob, for real. This is the best explanation.
So
Okay, so I think most go ahead, what were you gonna
no,
say?
no, go for it.
The people who messaged us, I think mainly were asking about ivermectin for cancer. I want to just maybe take a second and we can say our biases real quick and then go into more of the research now that we kind of have like a mechanistic understanding of like the on-label
Mhm.
use of ivermectin. I love it. I like danced in the fields with it with like symphony music playing. That's like the vibe because I had rosacea that was so horrible that it really helped resolve topically. So I've used it topically for the past couple of years. Although I think there are some subtypes of rosacea, and Bob, I'm sure you're able to speak to this, where it's not as effective for people. I just happen to have papulopustular rosacea. Yay for me. But it's like extremely effective for that. But yeah, during COVID, I mean, the thing that came up for me in hearing people talk about ivermectin, it made me feel sad. I mean, and this is again, there's like themes that come up right on the podcast. It's like people felt desperate, they felt scared, they felt a lot of, in my mind, there was like good reason they felt some distrust of what was being communicated from kind of like the powers that be, like public health, whatever, everybody is talking about COVID. And so they were just like, we need a solution, and that's what they turned to. That like the vacuum that is left from people feeling mistrust, or feeling like the solutions that they're given aren't working. I feel like I see that often lead into solutions that are questionable, but completely understandable. And even now, like last night and this morning, I was looking through some of the larger meta analysis that have come out looking at the effectiveness of ivermectin in like non hospitalized COVID-19 patients, more severe COVID-19 patients. It's interesting looking at the results. It's like some of these analysis are like, it didn't help with like X, Y, or Z, you know, marker, but like it actually did help with these other kind of more minor issues. And it's like, but always like the amount of effectiveness is very small. It's like the effect is not very big, or like it's just a completely equivocal with, like, statistically it's when you look at the stat, you're like, oh, the confidence interval. Bob, you should totally tell me, but it's like when this is how I was taught. It's like if the confidence interval crosses one in an association study, it's like you're kind of like, you don't
Mhm.
know if it's effective or not. And so they're speaking to that, but there's like these small possible improvements.
Right.
Mm. But it's like, how, is it worth it? Kind of, does the benefit outweigh the risk? So I don't know. In my mind, it just feels very like, I just feel sad about it a little.
Right. Right. So when we do our statistical analyses, we use those confidence intervals. You'll hear about like statistical significance and p values and all that. And then there's confidence intervals. And I like confidence intervals better because they give you kind of like a range of where the data is.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of guts to it.
Yeah.
I could talk for, 2.5 hours on it. I won't do that right now. Um,
Someday.
and depending on how, so you said like if it crosses one, if it's a ratio and a confidence interval crosses one, it is not statistically significant.
Yeah.
If it's an absolute difference, if it crosses 0, it's not
Yeah.
significant.
Okay, that's great clarification. Yeah.
And in these studies, some of the early ones showed some kind of minor benefit in secondary outcomes. So they might not have made any difference in hospitalization, but sometimes, well, they didn't need as much supplemental oxygen or something like that.
Right,
You
right.
know, it could be the difference between 1 liter per minute and 2 liters per minute.
Mhm, mhm. Like, not a clinically
Right. So,
impactful
so
difference.
clinic, so also, a big thing that we do is we look at statistical significance versus clinical significance.
Yes.
Something can be, statistically significant, like, oh, we can reduce hospitalization time by 6 hours.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
clinically, I see it all the time. Patients will be in the hospital for 12 hours waiting for a ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, well,
Ni
that's not too meaningful for me.
it's so important that you're saying this from I mean, it gets a little nerdy. I mean, I think our listeners will appreciate this though. It's like you can hear all over the place on social media that the outcome was positive or that it worked, but I think what you're speaking to is like how well does it
Right.
work? That's really the
Right.
question that you're after.
Exactly. And these early studies on COVID-19 and ivermectin, a lot of them have been kind of reanalyzed or more data is brought in and reanalyzed. The statistical analyses show that it was not a significant difference.
Mhm.
Either the studies had multiple interventions. So you hear about, like independent variables and placebo control and all that kind of thing. We had to be very careful when designing our experiment models, our study models, so that we can say the outcome is directly a result of this intervention.
Mhm.
And a lot of those early studies didn't have that kind of rigor.
Right.
And some of that is because it was post analysis. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to design this study and see how it happens. It was, okay, we have this data already. We're going to look at it.
Right.
Depending on what you're studying, of course, prospective studies where we design our study and then we do it are ideal, but we can't always do that.
Mhm.
Right.
In the case of COVID specifically, early on, as a medical community and then as people in general, we were so desperate for something that would help.
Right.
Mhm.
Dexamethasone, a steroid, was one of the first interventions, one of the first drugs that we were able to identify as actually improving outcomes, improving mortality and morbidity. And
Mhm.
we were so happy whenever
Yeah.
we figured out that this works, this is the dose, this is the regimen that improves the patient.
And I think it's worth it to remind people it's like you're not I mean, there's nothing wrong with the pharmacist at CVS. I don't wanna, but you're, like, in the hospital seeing
Exactly. Mhm.
people, like, right then.
Right. Which is
That's
a
important.
unique perspective because you're seeing the patients, how it's impacting them, right away, and then
Right.
Exactly.
continuing to observe them, that's pretty special.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder I mean, yeah, we don't have to get deep into the ins and outs of what the mechanisms might have been for COVID, but, like and then eventually, I mean, I think we'll talk about the research, but to talk about it as, it's been researched for cancer is the other question that people had. But Hannah, you kind of talked about your bias a little bit. You thought it was just
Feels
another one of those horse medicines.
I really did, so it's interesting because I feel like I had this alternative view based on how heavily the influencing was around ivermectin during COVID-19 that I kind of, went hard in the other way where I just wouldn't even I was like, "This is ridiculous. This isn't an approved medication. You can't mess around with that. You're getting it from a veterinarian or the feed and hardware store." But now looking at this, I am like, "Wow, ivermectin is amazing." Like, its
Hmm.
potential applications are incredible, and it's what it's been used for the since the '70s and how many lives it impacts. I mean, it's really just a miracle drug, like, from what I'm reading, and I feel kind of silly that I dismissed it. So I'm sorry to anyone listening if I dismissed ivermectin if you brought it. I was ignorant and I didn't know the history behind it. But that said, like you said, Bob, you have to use it the right way, and it can be dangerous. Wrong dose with the wrong application if you take too much. So I'm interested in learning more about what it can do. Like for cancer, you said, Vic, like that. I didn't even know that that was being explored.
Well, and what you're saying, you said something, Hannah, about, oh, yeah, I mean, people just like trying to get ivermectin without a
Yeah.
prescription. This is one thing that I did not realize was happening. And Bob, you, again, you kind of like with everything, like you're probably going to have more information than we do. But one thing I came across when I was just looking for kind of like pop medicine, references is that there are like debates right now in different states. Look, I pulled up an article about this, trying to make it so that people can get ivermectin over the counter. So
Yeah.
there's like actual bills. And I saw that come up. I mean, this is like from August 27th, 2025.
Mhm.
S- This is in the Texas Tribune. Texas legislature okays bill making ivermectin an over-the-counter drug, and it looks like there's a few states. Kentucky, I think, is one of them. Tennessee is one of them. I don't see Indiana, Bob, so you're out the your state made it, but there's like a few states that are trying to make that the case. And I think what comes up for me is this thing where it's like Bob, Hannah, and I have studied with this really brilliant microbiome researcher and who taught us the research on lactulose,
Mhm.
and it's like available over the counter in like many, many countries. And it's this like incredible prebiotic, right?
Right.
But we can't get it in the United States. And I'm like, I have wanted to get lactulose at the drugstore for the past 10 years. Like, why don't they pass a bill for that? It's like kind of the worst thing with that is you're going to poop your pants. But with this, it sounds like there could actually be harms. But then these different states are, I mean, this is kind of my question. Are they trying to pass these bills based on hearsay?
I think so. So I say this a lot. The worst thing to happen to medicine is money. And then the second worst thing is politics. And as medical professionals, we act in good faith.
Yeah.
And when a drug is prescription only, it's because it needs to be used appropriately or else it could cause harm.
Yeah.
It's the same way that you need a license to drive a car, right? And you definitely need a license to fly an airplane.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so using the medications, it's just fine whenever we're doing it the right way.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And we never want to get in the way of an appropriate therapy. So ivermectin, I think, should stay a prescription drug. And for its approved indications, it is amazing.
Hmm.
For not approved indications, it is not amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good segue for us to talk about. I mean, there is research that so I just, we make our like document for the show, and then I lay in bed and read articles on my phone and get like 10,000 tabs open on PubMed and never put them into the show notes. That's a problem. But this one study that I was looking at actually this morning when I first woke up, I have like all these different studies pulled up on ivermectin, the research in cancer. I just wanted to read really quickly the introduction because I think it's really apropos to the podcast. So, the title of the paper is Ivermectin and Gynecologic Cancer. What is the data? And these are researchers in Charlotte, North Carolina, Huntsville, Virginia, and then Seattle, Washington. There's like a smattering of researchers that got together to publish this paper. It's from this year, July 2025. And so in the introduction, they write, while medical misinformation and distrust in healthcare providers are certainly not a new phenomenon, accessibility to information has reached an unprecedented scale, outpacing the development of tools to help users evaluate the quality of the data they're consuming. During the COVID-19 pandemic, ivermectin was popularized not only for COVID-19, but also as a potential cancer therapy. And then they link actually to a great article talking about that. And these researchers say we have each been personally impacted by the loss of patients who choose ivermectin therapy over our best evidence-based advice and felt that a critical assessment of the existing evidence as it pertains to cancer was an unmet need. That's
Mhm.
pretty wild, so, I mean, I wanna hear, your take on it for cancer, but when I looked at the research literature, it's like there are some animal studies, so there are some, like in an organism at least, but it was like 90+% of the studies that I were seeing were in cells.
Right. So there's this push for drug repurposing where we look at existing medications and say, is there anything else we could use these for? And that's great because we have this existing safety data. We have kind of how we can dose it for certain things. We know what kind of toxic levels are. So now we can look for new indications for them a lot more easily. And we can kind of accelerate that research and approval process.
Mhm.
And it's one of them. And in terms of cancer treatment, ivermectin, the early data, it is early data, is showing that it can inhibit cell growth and it can influence cell death, so apoptosis and autophagia.
Mhm.
Uh, and of course, cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. So if we can interfere with that process, it can slow the progression of cancer. Cell studies are much easier to do than animal studies and much easier to do than human studies.
Yeah. They
So
don't,
that's why.
like, run away, they don't drop out. I mean,
Right,
I know there's a
right.
million reasons, but I can just imagine, like.
Mhm. So that's why that's the simple answer to why there almost all the studies are in cells,
Yeah.
because it's a lot easier to go in and aliquot some cells into a well plate and see how it does in 48 hours.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But it is really interesting because the initial data is does show promise and this inhibition of the cancerous growth.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of these studies are in cancerous cell lines
Mhm.
without healthy cells on the plate.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And we tend to have some healthy cells on the plate in a human. That's
Typically,
the majority. That's a joke, everyone, if people don't get that.
So for the thinking about that and then the passing of it being over the counter, like in certain states, what are people in like an average person, are they gonna go get ivermectin if they can and take like a low dose daily just for general like I'm thinking of it as like people are thinking it's along the lines of other questionable things like methylene blue or certain supplements that are, people think, oh, it's just going to help my mitochondria or longevity or just help me not get sick or just boost this or boost that in my body. Is that the line of thinking for the general population with ivermectin, do you think? Like they're going to just go get it and take it a low dose every day?
I can't really speak to what people will do
Yeah.
uh, in terms of like how we prescribe it. So when we're treating parasites and such, typically we give like if it's internal parasites, we give them one dose
Mhm.
and that's it.
Wow.
Okay.
Or we give them another dose in 3 to 6 months.
To get, like, the next round of whatever
Right, right, and it
patches.
it it depends on the indication, and, like, when it's used topically, then typically you'll use it topically until you have clinical improvement. So, like, when you're using it for lice, you use it until the lice are dead, and then you can stop it. So, it depends on the indication. I don't know what people would do, in kind of out in the world, and these very early studies into cancer treatment they don't have enough
Yeah.
data, don't have enough information to paint a picture of how that would look like.
Yeah,
The
are there
studies that
any
I've read,
studies?
the ones that I've read, they typically are like 48 to 72 hours of exposure to ivermectin in your little cell plate, where
Yeah.
they bathe it in the ivermectin solution and then they look at it in 3 days. People live longer than 3 days. So so
Yeah.
we can't really draw conclusions from that at this point of how that kind of dosing would look if it even shows benefit what we have right now in actual people.
That's kind of scary then that it'd be just available cuz yeah, okay.
And I wonder too, I mean, Look, I may be misinterpreting this, but it seems like the over the counter push politically is because of its use with COVID, not with cancer.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I couldn't find one study of looking at ivermectin in humans for cancer, like to see its role. I didn't see that. But the way that it's portrayed, one, and I may have totally missed it. And two, it seems like though the way that I've seen it portrayed on social media is that people don't qualify, right? They're not like, oh, it was in a cell study or in a mouse study or like that, which those were the two types of studies I saw. There was this one mechanism though that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know enough, Bob, or I don't remember enough to remember if it was because of the autophagy mechanism, which it was, but it was like ivermectin increased the reactive oxygen species in mitochondria. And that was actually like where the benefit was coming from. And actually, one of the studies we'll link to in the show notes talked about the other ways to increase ROS in the body, which was like cold exposure, plant foods, like these
Stressors.
hormetic stress. Yeah, totally. And Bob, this is just a little background on the podcast. There's like a couple topics that we've covered, like the carnivore diet is
Hmm.
the main one, or we have this kind of ongoing joke. There's this influencer who like tells people not to eat any plants because they're toxic. And it's like, I just think to myself, like, but my guess is like they would totally experiment with ivermectin, to like take ivermectin to like biohack, but like they're never going to eat kale, but it's like the same
Right.
mechanism. And so, I mean, I'm crafting this story in my head, but I did think that just from a biochemical perspective, it was really interesting that that was one of the ways that they think it might be effective against cancers because it kind of spurs the mitochondria to like produce they're signaling molecules is my understanding. They can be detrimental, but in the right amounts that we make them, they're protective.
So, not exactly.
Okay,
The
school me. I love this. I've been waiting for this the whole time we've had the podcast.
so the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, as we all know, and the mitochondria is a inside the mitochondria is a very extreme environment. So to produce energy, we have to fight entropy.
My God, you are the new third host of this
Yep.
podcast.
Welcome, Bob.
These are like our pet topics.
Oh,
Yes.
sure. So to produce our energy molecules, the ATP, we have to make that the less energetic thing.
Yeah.
Entropy, of course, entropy is not alive, but entropy decides that this is the easier thing compared to the other thing. So the
Mm-hmm.
mitochondria creates this, or it maintains this very extreme environment. It's quite acidic in there. There are the reactive oxygen species, and there's the electron transport chain, and all this stuff, basically. And if the mitochondria pops open, it's very bad for the cell.
Okay.
It's not exactly the same, but if you have the engine in your car, when it's inside the engine, the combustion is fine. If
Mm-hmm.
it gets outside the engine, you have a problem.
It catches on fire, right? Is that
Yeah, yeah.
okay?
And that's basically what the mitochondria are. Whenever they are maintained in their organelles, their membranes, they are perfectly fine. They take in the oxygen, and their molecules. They export the ATP, and it's great. Whenever the mitochondria get opened, then you have these reactive oxygen species, and those can cause damage to DNA. They can cause damage to enzymes and proteins. And actually, that's one of the mechanisms of apoptosis, of programmed cell death. The cell
Mm-hmm.
will intentionally open up these mitochondria to kill the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And then this process that, we have antioxidants, which are protective against reactive oxygen species.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this balance, because we need to have that mitochondria environment to produce the energy, the ATP, but we want it to stay inside the mitochondria.
Sure. And
And
so,
if,
go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
and if there's a leak in the mitochondria, like if these oxygen species are getting out, specifically cytochrome C is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
If the other parts of the cell detect, above a certain amount of that, they'll say, this is too much, wipe the whole cell, get rid of it, we're done. So
In a cancer cell, that sounds good though. I mean, is that kind of
it is,
yeah,
and
okay.
that's how some of our cancer drugs work. Is they induce cell death by hitting some of these biomarkers inside the cell.
Mhm.
And that's where some of the ivermectin activity is proposed to be. There's, I think, then ish proposed mechanisms for
Got it.
ivermectin
Yeah.
in terms of cancer treatment. And that's one of them is, well, we think it opens up these mitochondria, and we think that might be how it causes the cell death. There's a lot going on,
Okay.
And
Right,
like you
and
said, it's only been put in, like, a petri dish with cancer cells, not healthy cells.
to my knowledge.
That's
yeah.
important.
Mhm.
That is
And
so cool.
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
and most of our, petri discs, our in vitro studies are with cancer cells because they don't go through, not to get too in the weeds of it,
Please. It's great.
eukaryotes have linear chromosomes. And whenever those chromosomes are replicated, the last little ends of them get left out. And those are the telomeres.
Yeah, the telomeres.
So,
It's like the caps on the ends of laces, right? I
right,
think is how it was
right, right.
described to us in school,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And the ends of chromosomes are just junk because evolutionarily being able to discard a little bit of that is very advantageous. But when you get down to the ends and you start losing actual functional DNA, that's where a lot of aging actually comes into play. If you have a cell line, it'll eventually die just because of the replications. Cancer, some types of cancer don't have that issue. They regenerate the telomeres. So a lot of our cell studies are in cancer cells. Even if it's not cancer research, it's still in cancer cells because they can repair themselves.
But that's why.
That is
You see
cool.
that in study I've wondered before, like, why is this yeah, yes, that's so
Yeah. So,
interesting.
That's so cool.
so you'll hear about like immortal cell lines.
Yeah.
That's what it is because they don't just age out and die. There's a book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, that I highly recommend. And it's one of the first immortal cell lines, and it's cervical cancer cell.
Yeah. So what
I'm
I'm
putting it
hearing
in
is
my list.
cancer is the answer to everlasting life. That's
Something like that.
yeah.
It depends on what kind of life you want, I guess. If you just want to be a tumor, then yeah, absolutely.
Guys,
But it looks like this is a oh, you have to
I
go,
have
huh,
to
Hannah?
hop off, but I know we lost time because of our tech issues, so if y'all wanna continue this conversation, please do. I don't know if I click out, will it mess anything up?
I think it's okay, Hannah, and I think we're kind of, we're, like, winding down. We'll just kind of
Okay.
end it, and then
Okay.
I'm gonna beg Bob to come back every
Sure.
episode.
If I just leave, I'll leave my screen open, and then it'll
Yeah, I
continue.
think it's good if you
Okay.
just yeah.
Well, before I go, Bob, thank you so much,
Oh, of
and
course.
I would love it if you came back on and talked.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
There's
totally.
Absolutely.
so many things we could talk to you about, so thank you, and I'm gonna run to my appointment. Y'all are awesome.
Mhm.
Victoria, I'll
Good
talk to you.
Uh-huh.
morning, Hannah. It's nice to see you. It looks like this is actually a movie also. They've made this book, The Immortal Henrietta Lacks movie.
Yeah.
So,
This was one of the uh, essentially books that I was assigned to read in school.
gosh.
And there's a lot more to the book than just how the cell line works. There's also a lot of ethical considerations in it because these cells were not sourced in an ethical way.
Mhm.
And then part of the discussion is we have so much research and data and benefit because of the cells, but they were not collected in an ethical way.
Yeah.
So then part of the discussion in the book and in life is how do we reconcile those two things?
Right. It's like the oldest philosophical question, it seems like that. Yeah, I can absolutely see how that would come up. Like it did a lot of good, but it was not
Absolutely.
yeah. Wow, yeah, and just I mean, in like a like a meta perspective of that. It's I feel like that like overlay comes with so many of the topics that we talk about, where it's like sort of that like what you said in the very beginning, the risk versus benefit, it comes up over and over and over on the show, where I think people, and especially in our world in like functional medicine, they forget that there is a risk to
Right.
to so many interventions. I mean, it can get pretty, or it's more simplified, I think, when we stick in our world of like whole foods and good lifestyle interventions. But even with supplements, I think people forget that. And then if you get into more powerful compounds like some drugs, there is that risk, but is the benefit more? And it's like hard for people to put those two parts into perspective and be like, okay, we should move forward with this because the benefit does outweigh the risk. I think people get caught up in that a lot. But yeah, when you're talking about a person, it's like a very big example of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Bob, this has been amazing. Like your wisdom around this, it's extremely helpful. And I hope for people, listening, it sounds like kind of the takeaway is, yeah, ivermectin has its on label uses, probably not going to be any clinical meaningfulness in COVID. And right now with cancer, we just do not know. And again, it's kind of the similar situation as with COVID, where it's like, I mean, when I was in practice, Bob, I was a clinical nutritionist in Northern California, and tons of women up there got breast cancer, enough where actually I was part of an epidemiological study in Northern California because they were thinking maybe it was from the gold mining that was there. And so they came to study to see the levels of toxicants in the participants. The study was equivocal, but when people have that diagnosis, it's like there's some horrible diseases, but cancer has this like certain impact on people. I think it's really understandable that people would be searching for answers. But right now, there's, like you're saying, there's cool initial data in cells. We just don't know how that's going to play out.
Right. I think with cancer, compared to other diseases, there's an hourglass on the table now, and you don't know how much sand is in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that I always try to impress upon my students and that I keep in mind every day is that in the hospital, if the person's here in the hospital, they're not having a good time,
Hmm.
pretty much by definition. Otherwise, they'd be walking out.
Yeah.
So it's important to keep in mind that context of where the patient is and how can we help. And this is a very scary thing.
Hmm.
It's a lot easier to say, you just do this or that or whatever when it's not you.
Right. Right. The risk doesn't seem as like, it's like easier to look at it as like a statistical problem instead of like as a human potential. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bob, we, like Hannah said, we want to do an episode like just kind of on like prescription drugs in general. We also want to do a episode on supplements because that's like the world that we've lived in for so long. Actually, the next episode this month that we're going to film is on the hepatotoxicity of certain supplements. It's
Mm-hmm.
been up lately because people have gotten liver damage from certain turmeric supplements.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just trying to kind of like shed a little bit of light on these different topics. But yeah, if you're ever willing to come back on,
Of course, yeah.
what made you want to go into become a pharmacist?
So whenever I was in high school, I got really into chemistry, and then I took like a gen ed when I wanted to be a chemist. I
Hmm.
wanted to do like materials and polymers and stuff, and then
Cool. That's so cool. We actually just did an episode on apeel, and we're talking about like the material chemists, and we like needed somebody. I was like, oh, we need to talk to, because that's their background, and they brought it into the food industry. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry. Cool.
and then my freshman year of undergrad, I took like a gen ed biology class, and then I was like, okay, this is the thing.
Yeah.
Biochemistry is the thing now.
Cool.
And then I kind of moved into it, and I kind of explored with being like a MD physician, and then I kind of moved away from that because I was like, that's not really what I want to do. And then I found pharmacy, and I was
Mhm.
like, well, I should probably try this out before I go to school for, several years and
Yeah.
100,000 plus dollars.
Yeah.
And I got a job as a pharmacy technician. And, my first day was on a Monday. And then by Friday, I was looking at schools.
That's so
So,
cool.
so
That's
I
cool.
kind of, once I saw it, I was like, this is the thing.
And when you were looking to become an MD, I don't know if this was your experience, but I feel like I've had this before where it's like I kind of thought that what one profession did, like in my mind, I'm like, I would kind of think that an MD like thinks in the same way as a pharmacist, but they are
It's
I don't
very
know how to
different.
yeah, like, I can kind of see where I mean, I've just studied a tiny bit. I took, like, a pharmacology elective in grad school and was just like it was my favorite class in grad school. Like, Hannah and I were talking about this when you were off, where it was like, if I win the lottery or if we ever pay this building off, I totally wanna go to school to become a pharmacist. But I would think like the way that a pharmacist thinks or the way that I was taught in that class is the way an MD thinks, but it seems like they're very different.
It's very, very different. One of the best descriptions I've seen, I guess, is physicians are diagnosticians.
Uh-huh.
A whole lot of their training is here's a set of symptoms and lab values. What's wrong with the patient?
Right.
And that is a very valuable skill. That's very important.
Right.
And then but the how do we fix it is it's not like an afterthought, but it's a 3/4 of the way through thought.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's a very different skill set. Whereas from a pharmacist perspective, um, we're interested in the treatment and then we're interested in the long term follow up as well.
Mhm.
In my training at SIUE, we actually got a lot more overlap with like physician type training than a lot of schools do, where we got a lot more emphasis on recognizing symptoms. And um, part of that is being like, well, what do we need to be thinking about whenever we're starting drug therapy? And then part of that is it working kind of thing.
Mhm.
I actually I was really lucky in that regard where I have a degree of that diagnostic knowledge where I can give some input in the care team in that respect.
Seems extremely important.
It is. It is.
Yeah, super important. Ah, man, I'm so happy to just like know you. Your knowledge base is extremely interesting to me. It's very, very interesting. So, yeah, it's been cool to meet you and thank you so much
Likewise,
for your
yeah.
time. I might hit you up again. And
Like, so this is my thing.
I get
Like,
it. I totally get
I
it.
am excited to talk about drugs.
Dude, we will listen to you at the detriment of our job. Like, I will put off things I'm supposed to do to I totally understand. It's like sometimes my husband is like, I'm not even really sure what you're talking about anymore. Like you're off on some tangent or whatever. I get it. I get that feeling.
It's really funny because me and then some of my coworkers will get hyped up about things like we had a patient come through with one of the newest non-opioid pain medications,
Yeah.
and we were like going around the pharmacy being like, have you seen this, have you seen this, we have a patient here, it's here.
Yeah. I mean, God, that's big on so many levels. I totally get that though, Bob. I mean, that's why Hannah and I do this podcast is because we love to read research studies. It's $1 trillion industry,
Oh yeah.
the integrative health world. And it's so wrought with misinformation. And it's like there's this guy, this supplement millionaire who teaches people how to like source these absolute trash supplements from wherever and then sell them at these like insane margins. And people are selling like microplastics and sawdust, with like 3% moringa powder or whatever. But that's the mission of our entire agency is to improve this insane field that we're in because there is good, but it sure is hard to mine it out sometimes. Anyway, long story short, we're trying our best to like do God's work over here, but we're not biochemists. It's like we learned a little and we're research literate, but we just wanted to read research all day and we had to figure out how to get paid. And then we got angry.
I've had the same experience with the supplements and all that. One of, you can ask my parents this, one of
Oh God.
my quotes, I guess, is expensive urine.
Yeah,
And another one is snake oil.
totally. Have you seen this guy, Brian Johnson? Is the guy that like wants to live forever. He's like got a Netflix documentary and very,
It sounds familiar.
if you Google him, you'll find him immediately. We did a podcast episode on him because we were just like, this dude is so compelling and he's getting extremely popular. If he's like, it's like, come on, dude. I mean, if you watch the documentary on Netflix, it's unbelievable. But he gets certificate of analysis for everything he sells. Like you can see the third party testing. There's like some transparency there that actually isn't in so many other products that are sold. And he has this olive oil and he calls it snake oil. He like pokes fun at himself all the time because I think he can see like he's so outside of the norm. I mean, he's just a freak, but like he really is doing his due diligence. And even though he's kind of like, I mean, more than kind of, he's like extremely outlandish. I'm like, at least he's like testing and he's showing you like, this is actually what I say it is,
Right.
which is rare. Yeah. I mean, people are, God, it makes me upset because I do believe that there's an incredible amount of good, especially that could come like if the functional world and the conventional world held hands and like worked together. But I'm like, every time a crappy supplement is produced or some kook on a
Hmm.
podcast says that mammograms cause breast cancer, like we get farther and farther away from that collaboration that could actually help people.
Right.
Like my pharmacology teacher was a American Botanical Society herbalist also. And so she kind of taught like together and I was like, oh my God, y'all, we could do this. But the reason I get so angry is because one, I think it is hurting people, but two, I think it's taking us further away from collaboration and so many
Absolutely.
more people could be helped. But
Mhm.
yeah, what you said about the money in medicine, is legit and same on our side.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many times where I have my patient and I'm like, they need this. And then the insurance just says no.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me sick. Okay, well, come back on the pod if you're willing, come back on the
Absolutely.
podcast
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
please. Yeah, and Bob, thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, same. We're exactly the same brand of nerd. Sweet man, thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Bye, Bob.